Ladies and gentlemen, I'll call the meeting to order, please, and read the affirmation. Tēnā tātou katoa. We seek wisdom, understanding, insights into the views and circumstances of others, strength to seek what we believe in, humility to accept the combined decisions of others, patience, good humour at all times, tolerance and courtesy, while working in the best interests of our community. Councillors, ladies and gentlemen, before I begin, can I just on behalf of all of Council express our condolences to two of our councillors who have lost their fathers in the last couple of weeks. Councillor Linda Cooper, your dad Graham Sanderson passed away, former veteran who served his country, and we share with you your sense of loss. Councillor Greg Sayers, your dad Alan, 102 years old I think, and a public figure in his own right in terms of his role in journalism and photojournalism. So if we could just maybe stand for a minute and observe our condolences, and I'll call on a councillor also to make some comments. Thank you very much. Councillor John Watson has expressed a desire to say a few words about his constituent, Alan Sayers.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Just on behalf of my ward and fellow councillor Wayne Walker, Alan Sayers was one of the Albany wards, indeed Auckland's most outstanding citizens, and as the Mayor said, passed away just a couple of months shy of 102. Had a remarkably healthy life. Indeed, Alan looked about 30 years younger than his wife, than his age.
And it was nearly a slip.
I was going to say, because I think of June, she looks about 50 years younger than her age too. Just remarkable advert for good, clean, healthy living. Alan was born in the middle of World War I, as you might have worked out. His family started coming up to the Whangapraoa Peninsula in the 1920s when they had a family batch at Little Manly, and he could give very detailed accounts of the steamers plying their trade up from Auckland. He went to Auckland Grammar School, where he was the senior athletics champion, and was one of two grammar boys invited to attend the British Empire Collegiate Games in Melbourne in 1934, where he became the second fastest quarter miler in the British Empire. 4 years later, it was the Full Empire Games, the precursor to the Commonwealth Games, where he picked up a medal as part of the New Zealand quarter mile relay team. When Alan left Auckland Grammar, he went to work at the New Zealand Herald, and after a year in sports, he moved to the general reporting room and spent a year in the photographic department. Alan had a slightly different attitude towards covering sport. He mixed with a number of the top-class players of the time, including people like Bert Cook, and a number of them said to him, well, if you're going to write about us, why don't you turn up and try the sport yourself? So he got a bit of an inside information, and this is what he duly did. He represented Waikato in rugby, and he also played rugby league for Richmond Rovers for 1 year, in which he scored 7 tries in one game, which still stands as the club record for the Auckland Rugby League. So that was athletics, rugby and rugby league. In the late 1930s, unfortunately, Alan had a car accident which curtailed his very promising sporting career, and in turn he then went over to coaching and went on to coach a number of New Zealand athletic champions, such as Ron Agate, 7 times national sprint champion, as well as a number of New Zealand quarter mile champions. So he showed that not only could he play sport, he could certainly coach it. The Second World War intervened, and that was the end of athletics coaching for a while, and Alan was then an intelligence officer during World War II, having started out as a lowly gunner in the army, and experienced one of the most rapid promotions in the history of the military, because by the afternoon he'd been recruited to the intelligence section and then went on to serve there for the remainder of the war. After the war, he was offered a job in the Auckland Star and went on to become a famous, very well known, I should say, feature writer and chief photographer. And during that career, he covered some of Auckland's most notorious and bizarre crimes, including the Bassett Road murders and the Eric Mario wife poisoning case. Alan was able to get a number of photographs that no one else was able to get anywhere close to. He was later awarded the New Zealand Order of Merit for his services to sport and journalism. At the end of his working life, Alan then retired, and that's not quite the right word to use, up to Whangaparāoa Peninsula to his beloved Arkles Bay, where he became the Commodore of the Manly Sailing Club, Commodore of the Waiti Boating Club's Youth Division, and President of the Manly Bowling Club, as well as Chairman of the Auckland P-Class and Starling Yachting Committees. He also helped several young sailors who would later become rather well-known, people such as Russell Cootes and Chris Dixon during that time. He also threw himself into the local community and perhaps became best known in our community anyway for his rather heroic and determined efforts to stop set netting at Arkles Bay Beach, where dolphins were getting killed in the local community, intimidated, and Alan almost single-handedly took on this group of thugs and persevered with a rather less than helpful council to ensure that a set netting bylaw went and in due course became something of a local hero up in the Whangaparāoa Peninsula. He also wrote his own autobiography at 96 years of age, which was a good seller, a few years having earlier written a national bestseller biography of Fred Allen, who was a long-time friend of his. And I'll perhaps just finish, ladies and gentlemen, with a quote from Fred Allen, who certainly wasn't known for giving out compliments kindly, but this is what Fred said of Alan Sayers. "Throughout the years I have come to know Alan Sayers as one of nature's gentlemen with impeccable integrity. He is a man who cares about people. His contribution to his country has seldom been equalled."
Thank you very much, Councillor Watson. That's very interesting and moving tribute.
Well done, John.
Right, we now go back to our agenda. Apologies, none have been received. Councillor Quacks, I think, for early departure. We get through our business expeditiously. That may not be necessary. So I move that we accept the apology from Councillor Quacks for early departure. Have a seconder. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Are there any declarations of interest? Confirmation of minutes. We have the minutes of our governing body of the 27th of July 2017. I'll move that we confirm those minutes. So it's been seconded by Councillor Wayne Walker. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Petitions. No petitions have been received. Public input. We had 4 requests and they were declined. They were all in respect to weed management, and they were declined on the basis that one requester had spoken to Environment and Community Committee, which is obviously the same group as we are here, and the delegation for this issue lies with the Environment and Community Committee, and the other 3 were declined on the same basis. This committee has set up a political advisory group. It's expected to report back on the in October on the implementation of our weed management policy, and having delegated the authority to that committee, which consists of all councillors, is the appropriate place for those for that public input to be made.
Good morning for poisoning children this morning, isn't it? Lovely day out there.
I'm sorry, you have not been invited to speak. You have heard the reason why. You are welcome, as you have always been, to make representations in the properly accepted manner, and I ask you to respect the way in which the council operates.
Mr. Mayor, I do appreciate what you said, but you're not respecting the community because we are being denied any kind of hearing, any kind of understanding of what is going on. All the committees, the workshops, they're all closed to the public, and quite frankly, the idea that because I asked to speak to the Environment Committee about the setup for the political advisory group,
I'm sorry.
which I asked.
I'm
that the
sorry
public
to interrupt you.
Stop coming here, just stop poisoning us, and we
If you
won't come
don't
again.
respect the
How can we
procedures,
respect
if
you?
we don't,
You
if
don't
you don't
respect
respect
us.
the procedures of this meeting, I will have to ask you to leave. Okay, we now move to local body input.
Can we just
There-
ask for one clarification, Mr.
No,
Mayor?
no,
because
I want to make this point. I'm sorry, I'm speaking. I want to make this point very clearly. It is not true that the matter is being discussed in committees that are not open to public access. The Environment and Community Committee, a committee of the whole, is held here. We have heard from the various groups at different times, and it is done in public. You
No,
do
we
have the
have not
opportunity
discussed
to make
this, sir.
representations.
And you
No,
still
sir.
But I'm,
But we
I am
asked for
sorry, you are
representation
interrupting
and
the
we-
procedures of this committee
We have
unreasonably
been denied.
because you know that the delegation has gone to the committee of the whole
Yes.
to hear the issues that
But
you're
they have
interested in.
refused
I
from
could,
the day
could I
this
please
committee was
ask
held, they
you
have
to
refused,
be
sir.
seated? If you wish to continue to take advantage, as is of your right, to the democratic procedures of this council, you'll do so in the same way that everybody else is required to do so, which is to go to the appropriate committee to make your
But
representation.
will you accept us?
No,
but
I'm
that's
sorry. I'm not entertaining further discussion from your group. If you wish to take advantage of the proper procedures, you're welcome to do so.
So
You're
can
not
you
welcome to
advise
break
us?
the rules and the
No.
standing orders of this committee.
Can you
I'm
advise
now
us then
moving
how
to
we-
extraordinary.
how we
I'm
ask for
sorry, if you keep interrupting,
And when
I'm
are
going to
we
have
going
to
to
ask
get
you
that,
to
sir?
leave.
When are we going to
I'm-
get that representation?
You will need
When-
to
when are
you
we
will
allowed
need
to
to raise it in the proper committee.
But will you
But we
accept us?
have, but we have done, sir.
I'm sorry,
We already
I've
have.
made a ruling on this matter, and if you continue to interrupt, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I don't want to do that, but I will do that.
But you won't
Go
accept us.
back into the streets where they put glyphosate
Okay.
every week, no problem.
Sorry, you are disturbing
Yes, of
the
course we're disturbing.
meeting.
You're poisoning.
You have been asked to respect our
and we
procedures
stop
and
voting
standing
and voting.
orders. I'm now going to
New
adjourn
Zealand.
this meeting
Poisoning
while
New
you are
Zealand.
escorted from the meeting.
Yes,
Thank you.
sure. We go.
You just keep talking like that, Phil.
And Councillors, I'm sorry for that interruption. We'll now resume the meeting. I just will make the comment that we welcome people here to make input. We welcome the exercise of their democratic right, but when people don't observe the rules and procedures that are properly set down, then there will be sanctions for that. And I will not meet with people who don't observe the democratic rules of this institution, and that will be one of the first sanctions.
Let's do this.
Local board input, there is none. In
Point
case
of
you
order,
didn't hear
Mr
me.
Mayor.
Point of order.
Point of order.
Point of order. Councillor Casey.
Can we guarantee them access to the Environment and Community Committee public
They-
forum? Because that's what they're asking for.
Yeah, Councillor, they have that already, and they know they have that. They will be invited to talk to the working group. Councillor Holst, you might like to comment on that. If it was a case of denying people's rights, we'd all be upset. They are not having their rights denied. They're simply being referred to the appropriate committee that has the delegation for this area.
They are under the impression that they've been denied access to that particular committee.
I'll ask Councillor Holst maybe to speak
and
to
I'm
that.
happy to clarify. And thank you, Mr Mayor, for the opportunity to clarify. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's been made very clear to me by councillors around this table that at committee meetings, people want time managed well, and as the chair's role, that's my job. We have public input when people come to talk to us about items that are on the agenda. They know that this is being reported back, and they are welcome to come and speak to the item when it comes back. We think probably in October. We're going to be reporting back on Project 17 and the work of the Weed Advisory Group. We also have, Mr Mayor, the Technical Advisory Group that's made up of members of this group. So they have input into the process via that group. So nothing could be further from the truth, and you'll be very cognizant of the fact that the glyphosate reduction policy is being implemented as we speak, and we have a staff member dedicated to overseeing the implementation of that policy. So this has all been made clear on numerous occasions to the group. I'll welcome them warmly to speak to the agenda item when it's reported, and we'll notify them accordingly.
And they will be aware of that, so that makes this more an exercise in publicity than an exercise in protest about denial of rights. Extraordinary items, there are none known. Notices of motion, there are none. We come now to item 10 on the agenda, which is whether to propose an Easter Sunday trading policy. So if I could invite Pania Elliott, Paul Wilson and Katarina Maki to the table, please. In process, could I ask Councillor Fesso Collins to move the recommendation that we have in front of us? I will second that. We'll hear from our officials. It may be that you want to ask questions. I think mainly people will want to speak to the motion, but I will, for the sake of procedure, ask if there are specific questions first. But I think it'll be more by way of councillors expressing their views rather than asking questions, because I think the paper is very full and self-explanatory, but there will be the opportunity for questions. Can we hear from officials, please? Oh, sorry, I didn't put the...
I'm happy to move.
Oh, it's been moved and seconded. Okay.
E ngā mata āwaka, tēnā koutou katoa. Your Worship the Mayor, councillors, good morning. Pane will just very briefly outline a few key points from the report that may aid your discussion, and then of course staff will be available for any questions you might have.
Tēnā koutou katoa, talofa lava. Thank you. I'll just run through quickly so you'll be aware we had a range of mixed views through the community engagement process. So we had a representative survey which showed 55% of Aucklanders were in favour of option 2, more shops open. The self-selecting survey showed 68% of Aucklanders were in favour of the status quo, and local boards, those that fed back to us, were largely in favour of the status quo. Excluding one, and we sought to, through this process, weigh up the findings of community engagement, our impacts assessment against Council's strategic objectives, and the economic and community engagement processes. So that brought us to our recommendation of retaining the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very succinct outline of it. Are there any questions, first of all? Otherwise, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. My question's more around, so if this didn't pass today and we went to, because this isn't about deciding the right and wrongs of this today, it's the choice is keep it as a status quo or open it up to public consultation. Okay, so, and I'm not attached either way about the outcome, but my question is, if, for example, today this didn't pass and the other option of opening it up to public consultation and a hearing, so if we as councillors made comments falling one way or the other about the rights and the wrongs of opening or closing, would that make us unavailable to be part of a hearing?
Through the chair and the Democracy Services may wish to jump in at some
Because
point.
we've shown a bias one way or the other.
My understanding of how the process works would be so long as you enter into that next process with an open mind, which you're obliged to do under the Act, then you would be okay to sit on a hearings panel to make that decision.
Yes, but if you've made public statements which have been live streamed on record saying you know, agree to open on Sunday or don't, does that, the perception, is that an issue?
Officer can't answer that.
Just to clarify, as long as in the next phase, all councillors are of an open mind, then no. I would note, though, the process outlined in the paper, if you want to consult on an Easter Sunday trading policy, is a have your say process, not a hearing process,
Right,
and would
okay.
come directly back to the governing body.
So that would be okay. Okay, thank you.
I think that solves the dilemma, obviously.
that's great, thank
It would put councillors in an impossible position if by expressing an opinion on this issue, and everybody has an opinion on this issue, they weren't therefore able to take part in subsequent proceedings.
I'm just
But
making sure
I think
it's
that
a fair
answers
process if it was,
Yeah.
Mr Chairman. Yeah.
Exactly right. If there are no other questions, sorry, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have just got two questions, please. One is the background to the historic exemption for Parnell. It's an anomaly. I'd like to know a little bit more about that if I can. And the second one, I noticed that, was it 28 other councils have agreed to trade on Easter Sunday, is that correct? And I'd just like to know which ones they are and whether they're little ones or ones that are potentially larger cities. Thank you.
In answer to your question through the chair, I think we had this discussion at the last time about Parnell, and the conclusion was that there is generally no rhyme or reason sometimes for why some areas got Easter trading exemptions over others. I do know that His Worship the Mayor actually contributed the most information to answer that question last time.
Right, I just thought you'd done some more work since then, so I was just asking. Sorry, no. Okay. And the other councils?
Not specifically on the Parnell decision, no.
And the other councils?
The other councils was the other part of the question, Kat?
Yeah, so thank you. Regarding the other councils, I understand Christchurch is making a move to make a decision against adopting a policy. Wellington hasn't done anything, and we're considering now as Auckland, but it tends to be the smaller councils that have considered whether or not to adopt a policy. I'm not quite sure of the tally either way. You would have seen Hamilton as well recently decided to retain the status quo, but so it's a bit of a mixed bag at the minute. Yeah.
Great, thank you. There appear to be no other questions, so we'll move into the debate, and maybe I'll start off by making a few comments of my own. We'll all be under the time constraint that usually applies. I think during my time in Parliament, it came before Parliament 11 times, and on each occasion, Parliament failed to be able to resolve this issue, and courageously they've now passed it to us, which might be described as a hospital pass. In Parliament it's a conscience issue, and I'm sure that of the 21 of us around this table we all have our own specific views, and we ought to respect each other's views on that. My own decision is to support the recommendation which preserves the status quo. And I do that not for any particular religious reason, though the origin of the public holiday and keeping it commercial free was very likely religious. I'm in favour of preserving the 3.5 days out of 365 days of the year where we don't extend commercialisation to those days. And I do it because for me and for my family, these are special times of the year. And make no mistake, if it's Easter Sunday now that becomes commercialised, the next step will be Good Friday, because the same arguments will apply, maybe Christmas Day, and even conceivably Anzac Day. Each one of those days is a special time of the year for us to have with our families, where most of us are fortunate in not being obliged to work. Christmas, great time of the year in the summer. Easter, you know, the last break that we have, the time that we can bring our families together before the winter. And that is a time when we can escape commercialisation. And probably, even if this passed, most of us could, but some people couldn't. And I ask whether it's fair to say for us to put pressure on those people working in the retail sector that they have to give up this special time of the year. I know that the legislation says you cannot be compelled to, but put yourself in the position of a retail worker, particularly in a small business, where the boss asks you to work, and I ask the question, do you really have that absolute freedom to say no? And it's not just that it's not just the workers, it's actually the retailers themselves. I'm sure most of those retailers treasure the time that they have off. But if you're running a small business and suddenly it's open for everybody to open on Easter Sunday, you're going to feel compelled, in order to match your competitors, also to be involved with commercial transactions on that day. I'm also mindful of the fact that many of our retail workers come from the Maori and the Pacifica communities, and for them, for many of them, Easter Sunday does have strong religious significance. And I don't believe that they should be forced to make that choice, whether to observe this day or to observe the desire, the request from an employer to work on it. In the Colmar-Brunton poll, it shows that there are probably a majority of people in favour of commercialising Easter Sunday. On our online public engagement poll, it, however, shows something different. It shows that for those that feel strongly about the issue, an overwhelming majority are against commercialising Easter Sunday. I think for most people, yeah, it might be nice to go shopping, but do we need to? Does every day actually have to be a shopping day in the year? I don't think that everything should be about the mighty dollar. I think we should respect the ability of families on these special occasions to have that time together without feeling the pressure of needing to go to work. Easter Sunday for families is something that personally I want to see protected, and I'll be voting in that way. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Sue. I'd just like to note that I'll reserve my right for a right of reply at the end as mover. I just wanted to table a petition that I've received from 2,000 people from First Union who are here today, who are the workers that you've just referred to. I want to thank them for this petition, and I think it should be noted that I have it with me that these people have signed a petition to say we don't want to commercialise Easter Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'm clear that Easter Sunday should remain a day of reverence for those of us who believe in the resurrection, and a day of rest for all. Your Worship, a decade ago, Caritas, it's an international organisation of Catholic agencies, told a parliamentary select committee that decisions affecting people's working lives should be informed by the impact on those workers, particularly those who are the poorest and the most vulnerable. So I don't believe that liberalising Easter Sunday for shop trading contributes to work-life balance. I don't believe that it contributes to the well-being of families of whānau of Ainga. I do not believe that the community wins because retailers have more choice beyond the 361 and one half days that are already available for trade. Not only do I attend Mass on Easter Sunday, but I do take heart from a Catholic teaching that emphasises that there is a right to rest and to a right to religious observance as a worker's right rather than an individual preoccupation. Now, philosophically, I tend to believe in the primacy of voluntary association and individual contracting, but and I wouldn't normally assign a collective right because I generally prefer an individual's right to negotiate. But to me, that principle doesn't apply in relation to Easter Sunday because the right to rest and religious observance is paramount. Your Worship, I wanted to take an early call on this because I wanted to address a view that I believe is an incorrect view, and that is that this is an issue where a minority sectional interest is merely trying to impose a narrow worldview. Those of us who profess a faith, we argue for the right to that religious observance, but equally the right to rest, and that is a right that is assigned to all. I don't require people to come to church, but I hope that everybody enjoys their day off. Your Worship, it has been 27 years since we lost 51 Sundays, and now we are arguing about the preservation of the 52nd Sunday, which is on Easter Sunday. So yesterday I had the opportunity to reflect to Councillor Quack's my view that not only should the governing body hold Easter Sunday as a day of rest, but that I would hope that the vote would be an overwhelming one on that view, because I think that there needs to be a clear signal that there is a broad consensus emerging around this, that Auckland is a multi-ethnic and progressive place, and that we can be a bastion for the idea that rest still matters. So I also want to acknowledge Maxine Gay from the First Union, and I had penned an op-ed piece that I planned to submit to Maxine to consider as a joint statement, but I didn't do so because her advocacy is formidable and she doesn't need my reflections to sustain her argument. But Your Worship, in conclusion, I do want to say this, that I am a product of South Auckland, and as such I don't believe that you can be a product of the South and not be affected by that. There are thousands of my constituents who are church-going Māori and Pacifica people, and they place a strong emphasis on religious observance and the need for protection from the subtle expectation that Easter Sunday is going to be a day of work for them, and that weighs heavily on my conscience. So, Your Worship, I consider that the most important thing is to vote for the preservation of Easter Sunday trading because I genuinely believe that that contributes to the health and well-being of families, whānau and ainga in my community, and that is the paramount consideration for this debate. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor John Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a small retailer, I can sympathise with those people who wanted one day off. We shouldn't be just commercialising the Easter Sunday for the sake of commercialising it. I'll be voting for the status quo because as a small retailer, it comes up to the staff. They want to take a holiday and it comes back to the owner. The owner works very hard in retail. And for that reason, we shouldn't be pursuing the status quo. I want the status quo preserved.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor John Watson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and along with fellow Councillor Walker there, I also support the status quo, and basically for three reasons. The first one is one alluded to by Councillor Newman, that the status quo protects the faith values for those in our society who hold them very important, and I would suggest for quite a lot of other people who might not be classified as Christian or churchgoers but use Easter as a period of reflection and rest. So they might not necessarily be going to church, but there is often a spiritual element to this time of the year. The second reason is to do with family life. I think there are increasing incursions into time where families can be together, and Easter is one of those few times now where that opportunity exists. And the third and final reasons I have is to do with preserving the rapidly eroded workers' rights, and that goes to both the retail staff and as Councillor Walker said, and as to the owners and managers who are also affected by this. And certainly some of the submissions I received in favour of the status quo were from people in management who also felt strongly. I would just like, Mr Mayor, to very quickly question the notion that is sometimes put up as an argument for liberalising the Easter trading in terms of the ability of employers to use the protections of the Act. I think that doesn't reflect reality on the ground at all, that many workers are very vulnerable, and particularly in the retail sector, and would be in a very awkward position if they were having to start invoking any Act to ensure that they had the right to observe Sunday if they wanted to. I don't think that would roll out in reality at all. And finally, I would just like to make a couple of international comparisons, which can always be useful in circumstances like this. We're currently sitting at our 3.5 days, would reduce to 2.5 if some people had their way. In Japan, which is looked upon as a country with an incredible work ethic and a reluctance to take holidays, they have 17 national government recognised public holidays per year, and that's similar in China and Hong Kong. 17. In the United States, there are 11 federal holidays and 10 annual holidays. In the UK, there's 8 public holidays. So by any comparison where you look around the world, New Zealand is right down the lower end of public holidays where family life can be developed or people can have a little bit of a rest. So I would think retaining our rather paltry 3.5 in relation to the Japanese economic machine of 17 is more than an adequate balance. But I just would like, by way of conclusion, to say that I think this is an issue that people have spoken quite strongly on, and I think the way people have spoken in terms of our communities is to retain Easter Sunday and to retain the status quo, and I'm sure that's what's going to end up happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Richard Hills.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm happy with the status quo. I'm not religious, and I don't necessarily know if it's the strongest argument, because there's so many other religious holidays for many religions throughout the year that we don't observe holidays, but I respect the reason for Easter. But my main thing about keeping it is because of the chance to have some time with family, have a time to experience all the awesomeness of Auckland actually outside of the walls of a mall. You know, there's a lot to do when there's nothing to do. And I think that it's important that, you know, it's only 3.5 days a year that we protect this one that we might be giving away, because there's so many opportunities to just do nothing and just relax. And there's a sort of calm in the air, and it's like Christmas Day. You know, the next step I would worry is that we start saying, well, Christmas Day should be open to everyone as well. It's sort of this weird calm around the place that actually just feels good, and you can spend time, talk to people. You know, the best 4 days of my childhood sometimes with those Easter holidays, going camping, doing different things. And it was just the fact that I knew that my parents were not working, everyone else wasn't working, and there was things to do, just chilling out. The other thing is, as a previous hospitality and retail worker, I know how hard it was, and I was manager as well, how hard it was when we were open in hospitality on these days for the young people especially to say, look, I really can't work this weekend, I don't want to work. And I know often, it wasn't often spoken, but they were sort of felt they were forced or had to work because there was no one to work as it is. So if we open that up more, I know there will be many people of all backgrounds, but especially, I believe, young people who will feel they cannot say no to working these holidays. It will go ahead. And also, when your boss is there and going, look, no one else is working, you've got to, you know, you're pretty happy to have a job or a weekend job or a holiday job, and you're going to say, okay, I better work. So I worry about vulnerable workers being pushed into a situation where, you know, the law protects them, but you also have to know how to how to work the law, how to talk to a union, how to talk to a lawyer, how to talk to human resources, and for a lot of people that is a foreign body. So we can all say, you know, the law will protect you, but the law is quite difficult to navigate, and especially when you've got a job and you've got a good job and you want to keep it, it's often you don't want to rock the boat. So I think that's important that we protect, you know, these days, not for some conservative, antiquated, you know, harking back old days. I think it's just awesome that we can have a couple days which are clear for family, for relaxing, and for making sure that people actually get a genuine day off with families, because that's becoming less and less available with all the 24 hours of the employment cycle. And also, if you're, you know, I feel for some businesses who say they want, you know, to be open, but if your business model relies on, you know, an extra day, you know, then I think maybe that your business isn't doing as great as it could be if you need that extra day throughout the year. So I'm pretty sure most people can cover that day off. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I might be a bit of a lone voice. I'm not saying that Easter trading is right for every part of Auckland. I'm not saying that at all. But I believe that the status quo is a little bit archaic, outdated and unfair. I think we need to promote business, and we need to also support our visitor strategy. So I'm saying let's develop a policy that allows opportunity and fairness, that allows the visitors whom we work so hard to attract to benefit and contribute to our economy. People who work on a public day can have another day off in lieu. But I don't understand why, when we have an obvious request from Heart of the City, that we are saying no to that opportunity to trade in one of our biggest visitor-based locations that we have. And I don't understand why, when we have an archaic historic exemption for Parnell that no one really seems to understand what or how that came about, are we not allowing support for Newmarket to trade when we've invested thousands of dollars in improving that business district as a premier fashion shopping and entertainment sector? So I can't vote for the status quo just because I think it is unfair. And finally, my vote is based on, as always, on my research within my own area, and I note that the Ōreki Local Board is quoted as voting for the status quo. I spoke to the chairman last night. They only had 3 or 4 responses, so based on the fact that it wasn't enough to make a decision, they went for the status quo. But I've researched all our residents' associations and business associations, and their response to me was, even though some of them don't open on a Sunday, is you should allow it to happen if people want it in the areas where there are high volumes of retail request. So for that, I'm actually not going to support the status quo, and I think we should work to develop a policy, especially for the CBD. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't want to repeat what have been excellent contributions to the debate thus far on the importance of rest and renewal. All I really want to do is just remind people that we throw away our history at our peril. For us to be the multicultural, open city that we want the world to see, we do need to understand the traditions that have built us into where we are today. We've grown out of biculturalism. Without understanding the biculturalism, we will not be able to undertake multiculturalism, I think, to its fullest. And some might feel awkward about a discussion that entails the Christian values that underpinned European settlement in New Zealand, but that is, like it or not, part of the tradition of our country. My question, though, is to you. I find it completely unacceptable, given the importance of Easter Sunday in my family and the fact that some of us come from different parts of New Zealand to be together. I find it absolutely unacceptable that Parliament has dumped this on councils around the country. And we're going to have potentially a whole range of different policies for families on a day that is one that we traditionally have shared together. So I'd like to know what we are doing, Mr Mayor, in terms of advocacy back to our parliamentary friends and colleagues to say, please let this not be a precedent for other difficult decisions that Parliament is grappling with. And I'd really welcome your input on this, and perhaps you may care to, along with the mover, Councillor Collins, add a beat to the effect that our disapproval of this as a matter that should be preoccupying the time of this council when we are looking for a unified approach to policy across New Zealand on such a sacrosanct day.
I think I could agree, Councillor, that if they devolved funding to us instead of decisions that were too hard for them to make, we'd be better off. I would just note for the record, I voted against that bill in Parliament. Councillor,
but is there something that we can...
Look, it's in the hands of council. I think that you've put it on the record already, rightly, as I have, and I think other councillors would feel the same way. Whether it's necessary to write it into the record is entirely up to you. If you'd like to move an amendment, that's in your hands. You might like to take. There's a couple of more speakers. If you want to just take a moment, if you want to draft a further amendment, then we can put that to councillors. Councillor Filipaina.
Oh, this is quite good because I will support any amendment Councillor Fletcher wishes to put through in regards to your comment, because I totally agree. Also totally agree with the tradition and everything else. So, Your Worship, definitely will support and second if you need a second for your amendment, Councillor Fletcher. Your Worship, I'm just going to be short and sweet in regards to my time and talking. There was earlier was mentioned 28 other councils had sort of made a decision around Easter trading, and I note that there's 78 local, regional and unitary plan councils in New Zealand. So the ratio there, I think, is a very good indicator in regards to the other areas. So and this is the main reason why I'm supporting it, is that I looked at it putting the religion aside. I mean, I am, contrary to what some of my colleagues think, I am religious. There you go. So putting that aside, the choice I had was business or family. Now, Councillor Newman mentioned whānau, ainga, family, and my choice is family. I took into account, Councillor Hills, when you ended up having your first talk around this when it came here, and you mentioned the fact that you're going on the Easter holidays with your parents and everything else, and it was just so cool from a family perspective. So my choice is family over business, and so therefore then I will be supporting status quo. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you. If I can just ask a question, something's occurred to me first, if that would be okay with you, Mr. Mayor. Is there an option here to be able to investigate or come back if we want to say, look, for example, that radius of cruise ship operations, Newmarket CBD, and that it'd only be for that, for example, or does Parliament have to decide on another exemption like Parnell? Because I hate to think that cruise ships, it's like we're closed, New Zealand's closed today, and I mean that just, it's very few and far between. It's right at the end of the cruise ship operations, but it may be something that is a compromise.
Through the Chair, so Parliament has delegated the authority to you as a governing body to make all decisions now and in the future about Easter Sunday trading, so there will be no decision making by government in Auckland on this matter. You will note you can make future decisions.
Oh, so we could do that in the future.
However, for this particular decision, if you look at paragraph 26, we outline why we did not propose a partial policy in places like the CBD. But you still have future decision making at your disposal as always.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that wasn't cut off for the future. So for me, I mean, we do hear about the South, and very importantly, a very high Pacifica population, and often a related, real commitment to the Christian faith, and absolutely respect that. And So consequently, Henderson-Massey local board is the next highest Pacifica population, and so in Councillor Hulse, my ward, we have a lot of Pacifica churches, a lot of people that really value that time, especially that weekend. But we also have the highest percentage of local jobs are in retail as well. So that means that, you know, there's quite a high chance that a lot of people on low retail wages will be also in that group of people who want to preserve that day. And I am concerned about family time impact, and I do question the financial benefits for just one day for businesses, as some other people have said. But I do see the status quo is very messy, and that's my biggest concern. Because it is, you know, there's exemptions here, there's exemptions there. You know, there's so many shops that are allowed to open. It's very confusing for people. So I do feel that the status quo isn't ideal either. And I do, part of me feels that, yes, we've done some targeted type of consultation, but I don't think it's been as open as it could be, and that speaks to me for democracy. You know, a bit more of a chance for people to have a say, and that is my concern, and that's no disrespect to what our staff have done. They've had a very limited time frame to do this in, but it does concern me that maybe more people have not had a chance. When I look at the demographics that have been responding and have been chosen, it isn't exactly across the board in terms of our 1.5 million people in our region or the geographical area either. So that concerns me. I am going to support this, but those are my riders. You know, I don't think it's been a great process, but I would like to see, and I'm not going to put up an amendment now, I think it could be another piece of work. It does concern me. You know, we have high tourism, which does provide great number of jobs in Auckland here. So I would maybe in the future, it would be good to see us looking at the opportunity for the CBD in Newmarket, which is in that kind of cruise ship radius, and where a lot of visitors come to Auckland at Easter, a lot. And they do come for the difference that they can get from the small towns and those opportunities. So I think I'd like to just sort of reserve that space, that might be an opportunity, but definitely out in our suburbs and our wider region, I don't see a need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cooper, could I just seek clarification on para 22? It has certain shops are currently permitted to open, and these include, and then you've got garden centres. My understanding was that the garden centres were opening illegally. Can you just provide some clarification of that?
That's correct. Yeah, Mr. Chair. My understanding is that garden centres basically petitioned government to allow an exemption, but that doesn't extend to hardware stores that may be attached to garden centres.
Okay.
Only plants.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just for sake of clarity, if you're solely a garden centre, you are able to open, but if you're attached to a major supermarket or, you know, Bunnings or whatever, you're not. That's the rule.
I believe that hardware shops that have garden centre areas have to shut off the hardware area.
They could just open, yeah. I see a nod from the back of the room from some unofficial advice from Maxine, but okay, that is apparently correct. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Sharon Stewart.
Thank you. Just practically everything's really been said, but I'll be supporting the status quo, mainly because it's a time for family, and I think family values is something that we really need to address, and I will support also Councillor Fletcher's amendment there, and I think it is a shame that central government has left it to the local government to have to debate this today. So really, I think everything's really been said. So I will be supporting the status quo, and I have to agree. Looking at item 22. Just about all the services that are really needed. We've got service stations, dairies, pharmacies, restaurants, takeaways, all the services that perhaps we may require are already there, so I think we're really providing the service that we need. And if we decide to do away with Easter, I think you're quite right. People will start thinking about Christmas. So, yeah, supports.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Denise Lee.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's sort of incredibly vexed and at times messy argument. I'm reluctant, Mr Mayor, to categorise the topic under faith, family or business. I think each of us would have more aptitude towards one of those or some of those or all of those categories. So I'd just like to keep my comments to a broader, wider impact in regards to our regional role. Just back on that vexed topic though, I just note that some of us have referred to the possibility that young people might feel forced to work, but then I pick up, for instance, in the Rainbow Panel commentary that they brought up that in some instances young people might like the opportunity for an extra day's pay. So there's going to be always arguments on both sides. Back to our regional wider role, I'm really taking note of paragraph 38 where the staff team have brought up that they consider that there will be a minimal contribution to the Auckland economy as a whole by relaxing the laws. In other words, supporting the status quo. I'll take on board what is said in that regard. It looks like what you're referring to is just a transfer of spending from, say, small to larger retailers. So for me, that was really the turning point for me to support the status quo, but I'll be doing that reluctantly. I have really taken on board Councillor Simpson and Cooper's comments about what a shame it is that the resolution is so small and tight and doesn't allow for some of that geographic specifics that we could have done. I agree, Linda, that in the future we should have the courage to undertake partial geographic decision making where we need to. And for that reason, I won't be supporting B because we're not Otrahonga, we're not Queenstown. We should be able to make our own calls based on Auckland and get down to parts of Auckland that may benefit from some relaxed trading laws. So I will reluctantly be voting for the status quo, taking on board that we will see a minimal impact to the Auckland economy if we choose anything else. And I'll finish on one last note. Much to my surprise, one of my business associations in my area, the one that I'd probably least expect it from, surveyed their members, and 90% of their members, small retailers, would wish to retain the status quo.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Last speaker, Councillor Clow.
I'll be brief, and there's got to be at least one agnostic around the table, so I will just point out I'm just going to stick with the status quo, no question about it, and I'm just against basically the rampant consumerism and commercialisation of every day of the year, and I'm over it, and yeah, it's not for me, and so status quo.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And in reply, Councillor Fessa-Collins.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I've really enjoyed this discussion, and I think people will remember from when it first came to the table, I had some really poignant things to say, especially around our community in, as the elected member, one of the elected members for Manukau. 80% of the respondents in Māngere o Tāhu, Otara Papatoetoe came back and they said through this public consultation that they wanted us to maintain the status quo. The manager of the Newmarket Business Association agrees with Councillor Fletcher and says they don't understand why the government gave this back to councils, and that's why I've been happy to incorporate Part B in the proposal or in the recommendation. I've tabled a petition today we've received from First Union of workers who are saying they don't want to be forced. And this is not necessarily about being forced, but it's the pressure that vulnerable workers will have when their employers tell them, we want you to work on that day. This is about standing with vulnerable workers and vulnerable employees. And people have said this isn't a religious discussion. Well, it's not, but keep this in mind. There are a number of social commentators that are saying that consumerism is the new religion in New Zealand. And perhaps perhaps what's happened is the economic imperative has become the new mighty dollar and mighty God. Perhaps, maybe that's what Councillor Clow was referring to. I wanted to offer a personal reflection on this, which is why I will be voting in favour of maintaining the status quo. On Easter Sunday, my family wake up, we usually get up in time for church, but we'll gather around our breakfast table, because unlike the many vulnerable families, my family has the ability to at least have Weet-Bix in the morning. We'll hold hands around that table, about to have our breakfast, about to have our Weet-Bix, and my daughter will pray, and she'll say, thank you, Lord, that we're able to have family time. Thank you that I can chill out. That's the kind of language. Hey, how about that for new kinds of prayers? That I can chill out with mum and daddy-o. Then we'll get ready, we'll go to church, and Easter Sunday just passed, we went to Mass in Otara at St. John's, the Evangelist, with Father Brian. And I get around, and that's not bad for a person who was raised a charismatic. And then after that, we will go and meet with the rest of our family who have all taken that day off, who've all had the right to take that day off, and we'll share a big to'onai, a lovely lunch together, and we'll be able to enjoy spending time with each other. And if it's not at the park in Otahuhu, it'll be at Starling Park Playground in Ranui. That's where we'll go. Sir, I am endorsing this council, this table, to vote for the status quo so that the families of Auckland can have just that opportunity. The chance to spend some time with their families. The chance for mum or dad who's working hard as they can, to chill out with their families. The chance to play at a park. The chance, if they wish, to observe Resurrection Sunday. Because I'll tell you what it's about in our community. It's about hope. It's about a new beginning. Very good. And it's about opening the only door that should have been open, and that was a tomb that we talk about in the scriptures. Sir, I am advancing to this table. Let's vote in favour of this so that our families have a breather, so that our families have some time together, so that the city would meet its strategic objectives to give this place, to give our people the opportunity to leisure, to family time, and to some rest. And so I want to commend this recommendation to this table, and I'm excited that the people of Manukau have come out strongly in favour, overwhelmingly in favour, and I want to endorse those who have spoken for this recommendation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Collins, spoken from the heart. I'm going to put the resolution...
By division.
It's been called by division. That was my second question, but we'll take it by division. But I'm going to separate the A from the B because I notice Councillor Lee expressed a desire to vote for one part of the resolution, not for the other. So we'll do it. That's for the section B of the resolution. Yes. So we have. We'll do it by division. So I'll ask our officers to take the voting call. First of all, on A of the resolution.
Councillors, you're voting on item 10, clause A. Mayor Goff.
Aye.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
That was
Yes.
wrong. Put against.
Councillor
Casey should be the other side.
Councillor Clow.
Yes.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Filipina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yes.
Councillor Hills.
Yes, please.
Councillor Hulse.
Aye.
Councillor Denise Lee.
For.
Councillor Mike Lee.
Aye.
Councillor Newman.
For.
Councillor Quacks.
Or.
Councillor Sayers.
For.
Councillor Simpson.
Against.
Councillor Stewart.
For.
Councillor John Walker.
For.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
Yes.
So the resolution has been carried 20 votes to 1. I'll declare that part of the resolution passed. We now come to B of the resolution.
Division.
And you want that done by division as well, so we'll ask officers to take the vote call.
Councillors, you're voting on item 10, clause B. Mayor Goff.
For.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
No.
Councillor Clow.
No.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
Against.
Councillor Darby.
Against.
Councillor Filipaina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher. For. Councillor Hills.
Against.
Councillor Hulse.
Aye.
Councillor Denise Lee.
Against.
Councillor Mike Lee.
It doesn't add to it.
Aye.
Councillor Newman.
For.
Councillor Quacks.
For.
Councillor Sayers.
For.
Councillor Simpson.
Against.
Councillor Stewart.
For.
Councillor Sir John Walker.
For.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
For.
That will be carried.
Well done, Chris.
So resolution B is carried by 14 votes to 7. Thank you very much, councillors. I think that was a good debate, and yeah, I think people respected each other's views on that.
Now that the vote has been done, Mayor, please accept these Easter eggs on our behalf. I'm sure you will agree they're much better eaten with families. No, but we'll give you an evening, okay?
I declined to accept one before the vote on the basis that that might be treating, but after the vote I think it's probably okay.
Mr Chairman, Mr Mayor.
So,
Councillor Fletcher.
Thousands of retail workers, thank you.
Mr Mayor, it would be insightful to know how much the policy work on this has cost this council thus far. In financial terms.
Katarina.
$52,700.
$52,700 we have spent on this, not counting our time today.
And that was to meet the requirement, thank you, to meet the requirement that we must consult and get feedback on it. And we actually voted. I think I understand your point, Councillor. Would have been better if it wasn't necessary, but it was in the instance. Okay, can I have some order around the table, please? And we move to item number 11. The 2019 elections, and whether we stick with the first past the post or move to single transferable vote. I'll move the recommendation for the sake of procedure. Councillor Cooper second. Can I welcome to the table Warwick and our electoral officer. Very good to have our electoral officer here, Dale Ofsowski. So if you'd like to outline briefly where you've got to and why the recommendation is as it is, and then we'll ask questions.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this opportunity occurs every 3 years prior to the following election. You have the opportunity to change the electoral system, which is currently first past the post. You have the opportunity to change it to STV, which is the single transferable vote system. In the paper, we've outlined some of the key advantages and disadvantages of each system, and we've tried to explain a bit about how some of the key features of STV, assuming you know how STV works and how a voter votes through STV by indicating their preferences. So the key features of how STV works is that firstly it's a proportional representation system, and the two key aspects that we've tried to explain in the report are the aspect of the quota, which sets a calculated total number of votes that a candidate needs to meet in order to get elected, which is different to FPP, where you basically have to beat your competitors. And the other aspect is the concept of wasted vote. You can vote for the person that you want to have a go, and you'll know that if the person's not successful, then your vote will be transferred to your second preference. Your Worship, I think those are the key aspects. We've recommended staying with the status quo purely because the feedback that we get around the traps, so to speak, is that there isn't an appetite to change and that people do find STV pretty complicated.
Thank you very much, Warwick. Dale, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillors will have noted that the electors themselves have the right to petition if they want a change of system. It requires 5% of the vote, which is 51,000, I think. And it also costs us something like 1.2 million for a referendum. But that is the legitimate right of electors if they disagreed with any council decision, if it were to be for the status quo. We now have questions. Do any councillors have questions? Councillor Darby, I see first of all.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'm looking at the part of the report that reflects local board views and implications, and I'm aware that there's been no formal report to boards on this matter. We've had a long lead-in time, and considering that local boards are as affected, if not more, because of the number, how is it that we've arrived at not treating with them in a formal way to get their formal feedback to contribute to a decision of the council of which they are part?
Thank you, Councillor. The answer to that is that we attempted in rather less formal means to get some indication or some feedback, and that happened in two ways. You recall that there was a report that we put to you to do with a submission to the Select Committee. That report included looking forward to other events and decisions that needed to be made by the Council, including STV and Māori Ward. And that same report went to all boards, and some boards commented on it and others didn't. And as part of the governance framework review exercise, we also included on the slides that we showed to board workshops that these issues were coming up as well. There wasn't a lot of discussion on those particular items, but we didn't really pick up an appetite for looking into that further.
Okay, well, I'll comment on that later, Mr. Mayor. The other point that I'm picking up from the report is in your recommendation in B, you refer to perceived complexity of the STV system. Can you explain the perception of complexity, not actual complexity, but the perception of complexity as being reason to dismiss a voting system? And did the jurisdictions of Dunedin, Greater Wellington, Kaipara, Kapiti, Marlborough, Palmerston North, Porirua and Wellington, so that's Greater Wellington and Wellington, did they also get lower turnouts when STV was introduced, the same or greater? Did they encounter perceived or actual complexity when they introduced it?
Your Worship, the reference to perceived complexity is just a typical sort of feedback comment that we get. It's anecdotal. STV is too hard to understand. I have found myself that if you apply some time, work out the maths, it's actually got a lot going for it. I'm a proponent for it myself. And what we're trying to reflect in here is the feeling that we get around the council.
So there's no evidence of actual complexity that we picked up from the jurisdictions that I've just outlined?
No scientific evidence, it's anecdotal, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Clow.
Yes, I'm going to vote against B because I'm a supporter of STV. There's been a lot of criticism over the years about Australians, and indeed we have a famous Prime Minister who made a very funny quote about our migration loss when he talked about how it improved the intelligence of both countries.
It's the only time I ever agreed with him.
So I have to ask, the Australians have no problem with STV, and they've had it for a long time, and obviously I'm tongue-in-cheek in saying they seem to work it through, then surely we could work it through. So have you got any comments, either Dale or Warren, about Australia and how they deal with it on a much larger scale and successfully?
Your Worship, we haven't studied Australia. Perhaps I could ask Dale, as the electoral officer, just perhaps to give some of his experience with councils that have tried with STV, and perhaps gone back to FPP?
Well, Australia, of course, have used form of proportional representation for over 100 years, so they're well used to that. With regard to New Zealand, some of those councils, the 8 that used it in 2016, have used STV for quite some time, since about 2004, so they're well versed in that. Some of them, like Wellington City Council, moved to STV as a result of a poll, which was narrowly, I think it was 51 to 49 or something like that. They held a poll again in 2008, and it was reinforced, but a very slim majority. So those councils are using it successfully. Greater Wellington Regional Council moved to STV in 2013, largely because all but one of the constituent territorial authorities used STV, and they wanted consistency for the electors of the STV, because the DHBs, of course, have to use it. There are 3 councils that originally used STV and have moved back to FPP. Thames Coromandel District Council, Matamata District Council, and the small Chatham Islands Council. The reasons that particularly Thames Coromandel gave was it didn't achieve the diversity that they expected, and also they've perceived that it was difficult for the electors to understand. So they're the 2 reasons that that council in particular gave for the reason for moving back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions about the STV, and probably for Dale, because he takes the returns, if that's okay. One is, we've said here that STV, you usually get the result about a day later. I mean, I haven't seen that, but in your experience, is it usually a day, or does it seem to be quite a few days before you get those results? Because I often watch the WDHB to see what's happening, and a friend of mine's on there, and I often ring him, do you know yet? And he goes, no, still don't know. So I just want to know how accurate that comment is.
With STV, we do not issue a progress result, because we believe it's too dangerous insofar as every vote makes a difference, or every vote counts. So when you input all the votes into the STV calculator, we ensure that all valid votes are in there, other than special votes that have to go off to the Electoral Commission. So once all votes are in, then we push the button, if you like, to prepare the preliminary results. We experienced, of course, in 2016 a huge rush on the election day morning, and of course we had a significantly larger hand-delivered votes on election day morning, which we then had to process, and we worked well into the night to achieve that. But generally, we now say to STV councils or the DHBs, don't expect a result on the day. Or first of all, there is no progress result, so there's nothing available between 1 and 2 on the Saturday for STV. Expect it on Sunday morning. That's when we've worked all through the night to actually open and process and capture all those preferences for STV votes, and then run our audit reports and produce a result.
So it's still, you say, a day rather than on the night?
Correct. You won't get a...
That's preliminary, though.
That's a preliminary result. Now, some councils issue progress results for STV. We believe that's too dangerous in our view.
Okay. And the other question, if you'll indulge me, Mr. Chairman, is, I mean, I struggle with the DHB one, and because especially when you've got, maybe 30 or 40 candidates, and we do have a really low vote turnout in local body elections. So the reason I ask this question is because I'm concerned about making it even harder for people. So do you, in terms of spoiled returns for STV, what's the percentage against maybe FPP, or do you measure that?
For the DHB elections in Auckland, it's been reasonably high, and other DHBs around the country. But that's particularly where the council uses FPP, and then voters then have to switch to STV. We would have between 10 and 15 of votes returned are deemed either informal or blank. So a lot of voters actually choose not to vote.
Don't even try.
Yeah. And others will actually make mistakes or tick.
And do you have a comparison between the FPP with the FPP?
Much, much lower. I haven't got the figure off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you. That helps. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Simpson.
I think Councillor Cooper may have just asked my question. It was really that we've obviously got first past the post for local government, and then keep on getting the STV, I keep on calling it something else. STDs. Sounds like a disease. For the hospital board and stuff. And my question was, the difference in return, do people stop once it got too hard? And I mean, I'm with everyone. I think that it's hard enough to get people for vote. I want to make this voting as simple as possible. And I'm just trying to get the evidence to show that maybe the alternative voting, STV, is harder for people to deliver, so therefore they don't bother.
That's correct. We'd have a high number of people that just submit it blank.
Answers my question, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Last question is Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And in the interest of full disclosure, I've managed to get elected under STV and first past the post, 2 successful elections to DHBs across most of Auckland. So I'm not doing this out of self-interest. I know there's been accusations of us, worried about change in case we don't get re-elected. So just putting that out there. Can I just ask if there's any opportunity? I'm going to be supporting the recommendations. I don't think we're right for change. But is there an opportunity in the future for us to link a possible change in the voting system to perhaps advocating for the government to see some sense in compulsory voting? Because I think the two need to kind of be linked. I'm sorry if that's kind of been covered already, but I just think we need to be a bit clearer.
Yes, that's not a subject that is open for submission unless we want to speak to that in our submission to the Select Committee on the inquiry into the 2016 elections. It has been raised, discussed by that committee in the past, but they've left it.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Mayor, the issue is, we're desperate to get as many people voting. Whoever they vote for, we want people to participate, and I think anything that acts as a barrier to participation is a bad idea. I also think there's a slightly sort of golden glow over STV as a way of delivering up more diversity. I look at the DHBs, it delivers up the same bunch of middle-aged white people like me. So I think we need to, STV is not the answer to diversity. I think different ways of dealing with our election and getting as many people voting as possible is actually the answer.
I think the question of a compulsory vote is an interesting one and is worthy debating, but we probably shouldn't do it within the context of this paper because it's not part of the consideration. But I used to be totally against it. I'm now probably leaning in favour of it. But it would be a wide-ranging debate that we needed, and we should have that one day.
Your Worship, perhaps just a comment about the future scenario, and Marguerite's just reminded us that when we get to the point of having online voting, those sort of systems will prompt people on how to vote, and it will be much easier to vote correctly having a FPP and STV.
That's a good point. Thank you, and thank you, Marguerite. Right, we now come for discussion. So we've had the questions. Which councillors would... Councillor Newman would like to lead that off.
Your Worship, I don't think that the reference to the application of single transferable vote in Australia is a strictly accurate one, because if you... the ballot paper for an STV voting in Australia includes 2 options, above the line or below the line. Above the line is what most Australians do, and that's when they give the rank. No, they don't tick, they rank the party that they want, and that means that all the candidates on the party's list in rank order of preference, that is how the distribution of the quota applies. And that is a very simple way for the Australian electors to exercise their choice using single transferable vote in Australia. That is not an option, as I understand, that's available here. What is available here would be the below-the-line option, which they also have in Australia, but which very few Australian electors use, where you have to go and literally rank every single one of them. The other thing is that, of course, if you go to an Australian polling station, you've got all these people that are lined up outside offering you the how to vote cards, where you can just receive one and literally do what your preferred party wants you to do. So I think it's a very different argument to what is being proposed here. So I support first past the post, and I would counsel against any reliance on the Australian option of STV, because that's not available for our system of voting, Your Worship.
Great, thank you very much, Councillor. I've got no other calls, so I think, I have now. Councillor Darby.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Sorry for being a little bit late there. Look, I just can't help but think that the first motion is a bit irrelevant. It's not usual for us to highlight an emotion. There's not really a decision being made there. We don't have note decisions, but I'll let it lie. I have to say that I am disappointed that local boards are not contributing through formal resolutions to this. This is a really important matter. This is about democracy. And I think that is a gap. And I have brought up this matter that we needed to make this decision soon after the elections. And I just would have assumed that our management would have made sure that formal reports went to boards to garner their feedback to contribute to our decision making. This is an important matter. This is not a tick box exercise. This is at the heart of democracy, or it's part of that important process. So I stress that again. We cannot do anything about that at the moment because we've got to lodge this by 12 September. STV is not the voting method that got all of us here or local board members, and it's you'll likely be sitting around here thinking, well, what is this STV? I'm not conversant with it. I'm safely and comfortably around this table without it, thanks very much. I note the reference to perceived complexity. I guess there's a perception of conflict on this. If it's not actual or perceived, it's certainly probably an internal conflict for many, because we're here not because of STV. We're here through what I would term a pretty archaic method that has done the nation and local authorities reasonably well, but we have been seeing significant decline in participation. And I'll come to that shortly. So I think the makeup of this council and local boards would likely look very different if it was an STV system that we used to elect members. Without doubt, I think it would be different. And it may mean that I'm not here, but I want the best possible and the most precise system to reflect this city's, the need for broad representation and to reflect the increasing diversity of this city region of ours, Auckland. The STV system, all the evidence from those countries, if you go to Scotland, I know Australia's been referenced, but maybe if you go to Scotland, you will see high levels of participation. And there are a number of other countries as well, but it's not that evidence of another nation that I want to bring here. If you look at just the analysis of STV in this report and other commentaries, there's some common threads that come through, and one is it delivers a more precise representation. All votes have weight. Every vote has weight. Not a single vote is wasted unless you destroy your vote or you abstain. And as I said earlier, it better reflects the increasing diversity of Auckland. When you come to the vote turnout of Auckland at the last election, we had a turnout of just 38.5%. Compared with those that have now gone to STV, I think the closest to that would be Palmerston North at 39%, Dunedin 45%, Greater Wellington, I think it's sort of 44%, Wellington 45.6%, Marlborough 53.7%. They're all well above the comparators that are using first past the post. Matamata was referred to before. Matamata went backwards at the last election at an alarming rate. It went back 24%. There's no evidence that Matamata is getting it right. In fact, it had a miserable turnout at the ballot box, and I'm sure Dale would attest to that, and we'll be looking at it. So, members, I actually think we do need to look at this a lot more seriously. We don't have the time now. We have to make a decision here today. All the evidence that I see, and it's not the advantages and disadvantages on both sides, I see the advantages with STV, hands down. I'm not swayed by the perception of complexity. It's not showing up as being overly complex for the cities I've outlined. I think we should shift towards STV.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clow.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of have a question, if that's okay. I want to make sure that B's taken separately and by division. But I don't think B's. I think B's going to go through. It would appear. But where does that leave us with randomisation of the names instead of alphabetical?
Yeah, that's still an option that's debated next year.
Yep. Next year. Okay.
Okay, I have no other... Oh, yes, I do. Sorry, Councillor Mike Lee.
I'll be very brief, Mr Mayor. I agree that A doesn't add much, you know, doesn't everything and everyone have advantages and disadvantages. I don't think we need to vote on that. But in regard to Councillor Darby's comments about voter participation and the mode of voting, I think he's not necessarily correct on this when I look at the voter turnout for small communities like Great Barrier Island, which is well over 60%, and Waiheke Island, which is close to 60%, and even the central city, which is over 50%. It's not necessarily the mode of voting, I believe, which is critical to this. Other factors are in play. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Reluctantly, as a member back in the day, in the 90s, of the Electoral Reform Coalition that actually saw the introduction of MMP, which we would all have to agree has introduced the diversity to Parliament that was missing, although that in itself had its has its ongoing shortcomings. I just feel that what is being proposed today here and by some in terms of the adoption of STV at this point is not going to be as workable as I'd like. I again come back to the role that Parliament has to play in actually setting the right framework for us across New Zealand in coming up with the right electoral tools to encourage that absolute expression of faith in our democracy that everybody's going to get out there. And I'd just like to see us, before we give consideration to any change, have dealt with this comprehensively, and I don't feel enough work has been undertaken to date. So reluctantly, I'm not really wanting to support change just at this moment. I think we need to put a lot more time into it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Simpson.
Finally, Your Worship, I think that we should keep it simple, simpler the better, and help people, encourage people to vote. So I'm going to stick with the recommendations. I think they're great. Thank you. First
Thank
past
you.
the post.
Last two comments, short and sweet. Councillor Hills.
Yes, thank you. I was a bit torn on this. I fought hard during the referendum on when we had the MMP referendum to keep MMP because it was so important. I was worried that the first past the post was going to come back because I found, obviously in a central government sense, MMP did change the makeup of Parliament for the better in a lot of ways. My concern, and I probably would be sold more on STV if there was good examples of voter turnout on the STV areas, but actually the councils that did do STV were below or the same as us, apart from Wellington, which was 45%, but that increased, I'd say, largely because they had a really exciting mayoral contest. They had a lot of competition. And I didn't mean it like that.
I'd like you to qualify that comment, Councillor.
You want to start again?
You're on film, mate. You're on film.
Sorry, I'll just take the foot out of my mouth. I sort of meant because there was
They were more closely contested, I think was what you were saying,
a large
Councillor.
number of candidates that were well known. Sorry.
Stop.
That's it, Richard.
Do you want to quit while you're ahead, Richard?
Anyway, I probably shouldn't make non-evidential statements. Yeah, time for an Easter egg. But yeah, so I don't see that STV has changed the voter turnout in those areas that did have STV. I'm concerned that we do confuse people even more, and that is often the way people say they don't understand it. I mean, for God's sakes, we've had MMP for 20 years in New Zealand and people still don't understand it and are still asking questions and still don't exactly know. And even people who are closely interested in politics don't often understand MMP. So it's I worry that changing it, we look at it, even things like electronic voting, I don't think will change the turnout. What changes turnout is exciting things. It's about engaging differently with people. It's making sure we include as many people as possible in everything we do and stopped being negative in the media and all sorts of different things. I think this one sort of panacea, we'll change the voting system and hope that it changes everything. I don't think a whole lot of young people I know are running out and going, man, I'd vote if we had STV, but I'm not going to vote now. You know, it's a bit difficult. So, yeah, I don't see a lot of evidence that's a clamour for change. So I will be voting for the to keeping first past the post. But in the back of my head, I also feel that's a shame because it is such a sort of I don't know. I do worry about FPP as a sort of old system that's past its use by date. But I also know that the examples of Australia, they do have compulsory voting. So of course they're always going to have good turnout. But they also get Pauline Hanson, so that's a little bit. Yeah, so yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I just point out that when Councillor Hills was talking about his views on when we changed from first past the post to MMP, he was age 6 at the time. It's a really worrying tendency, Councillor. Right. What I'm proposing is that we take A and C as noting together because it's simply noting, and then we take B separately and by division. So if councillors are happy with that, A and C are moved. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. And we'll now take the substantive recommendation B by division and ask officers to conduct the vote.
Mayor Goff.
Aye.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Yes.
Councillor Clow.
No.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
And see if I could beat Desley.
Councillor Darby.
Against.
Councillor Filipaina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yes.
Councillor Hills.
Yes.
Councillor Hulse.
Aye.
Councillor Denise Lee.
For.
Councillor Mike Lee.
Aye.
Councillor Newman.
For.
Councillor Quacks.
For.
Councillor Sayers.
For.
Councillor Simpson. For. Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Sir John Walker.
For.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
Yes.
It's closer than Desley's.
Okay, so the motion is carried by 19 to 2. But,
Didn't need anybody to stand with her.
thank you very much for that, councillors. We now move to item number 12. Councillor Filipaina, I think you want to move that. I'll second that, and if I can invite to the table Dominic Wilson, Head of Co-Governance. Dominic, if you'd like to speak briefly to that, and then we'll put it to questions.
Kia ora tātou. Yes, the paper, Your Worship, is about the non-voting Crown representative on the Tupuna Maunga Authority. The position lasts for the first 3 years of the existence of the authority, and after that point it lapses. And so the core of this paper is the question of whether the position should continue and for the period of its continuance. The Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage is proposing to appoint a non-voting representative for a period of 3 years with a further ability to appoint for another 3 years. And the reason why is because the Minister considers that this position will assist with furthering an application for World Heritage status for the tupuna maunga. Your Worship, I'd just like to highlight too that, and it's of course important to the Council that in this case the costs associated with this position are covered by the Crown, so there's no issue to the bottom line of the Council that I'm aware of. And the second matter, Sir, is that the appointment process, if it's agreed that a position should exist, is then handled by the Ministry, and the Council only has this question of whether the position should exist before it, Sir.
Thank you very much. If I could just start off with a question. I understand the argument that having a Crown representative may actually help us in terms of our application for a World Heritage status, and that will probably sway many of us to support it. But are there any other reasons why we would have a Crown representative on this authority?
Sir, I'm aware that the treaty settlement process between the Crown, of course, and the Tāmaki Collective, that produced the concept that there would be a Crown representative that would keep an eye on the process for the first 3 years. And so the way that the legislation is set up, it's only for that first period. However, Sir, I think there has been, I understand from the members of the authority, there has been benefit of having a Crown representative. And the last 3 years it's been a person from the Department of Conservation. But Sir, in this particular position, the benefit really is largely focused on the potential for World Heritage status as a key plank of the aims of the Tupuna Maunga Authority.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Casey.
Yeah, I don't quite understand. What role, how does that improve our application? How does a voting member of the Maunga Authority?
Through the Chair, so this is a non-voting member, but the person that's proposed is a senior manager, Tier 2 manager within the Ministry for Arts, Culture and Heritage, and it's the person who would actually lead the production of the bid within the Ministry.
I still don't understand.
Further question?
I don't understand though, because that person will then be on the Maunga Authority making, decision making.
No, non-voting.
Non-voting.
No voting.
Yes, it's a non-voting position.
So all we're doing is rolling over the current non-voting member?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. That's fine. Oh, sorry, I missed that completely.
That's fine. Any other questions? If not, is there any discussion on this? I think it's pretty straightforward, but happy to entertain any comments. If not, I'll simply move to...
I'll second.
Sorry, Chris. Councillor Fletcher.
During the last term of council, I had the privilege of being the deputy chair on for the set-up phase of the Maunga Authority, and it was a great privilege to be there. It's been, I think, an outstanding success, but I repeatedly drew attention to the fact that the creation of these co-governance arrangements is at the discretion of the New Zealand Parliament in the case of the Tupuna Maunga Authority, but it was done without actually understanding the real costs that would be imposed on Auckland. And that remains unresolved, and I just really want to have the satisfaction that the continued representation from central government in some form on the Maunga Authority will actually result in some understanding of, we've got $80 million in our LTP for the Maunga Authority, and we know the long overdue maintenance on many of the Maunga. We understand that there are going to be increasing costs associated with applying for World Heritage status. There will be opportunities with it as well, but I'm just not completely convinced given the level of representation I saw in that last 3 years, that it's actually going to translate to dollars. And at the end of the day, it's just dollars I want to see there. So I wonder whether a very able officer here would like to just give me that comfort.
Sir, as best I can, I am aware that Local Government New Zealand is working on research on the costs of co-governance with a case study on the Tupuna Maunga Authority in the future. So there may be some very concrete data to come out of that, sir, which may assist the member there. But, sir, perhaps also it can be something that perhaps the members highlighted a further point of interest of why there may be value in having the non-voting Crown representative, is that maybe it's an opportunity for the Council to continue that dialogue into the future. That's perhaps all I can say, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to put our officer in a difficult situation, but my difficulty with a member of the Department of Conservation being there is, I mean, DOC is underfunded already. It's an advocate that we need that actually has links to Treasury that is required. So I wonder whether there is a way, if we are to agree to this appointment, that we could influence who that person might be. It's probably something we take offline, but
I think you'd need to take that offline. The legislation, I presume, requires that the appointment be by the Minister of Arts, Culture and Heritage. So he or she, whoever it is at the time, could actually appoint. Is there any limitation on who the Minister might appoint? If there is no limitation, then representations could be made to the Minister, but I think they would still probably want to appoint the person that they thought was appropriate rather than us, but there would be no harm in trying. But is there any limitation on who the Minister appoints? Does it have to be a member of Conservation?
Sir, yes, the Act is clear that the appointment's made by the Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage. I understand that it does go through Cabinet.
But it doesn't have to be a conservation person. So they have the Minister has the flexibility. I think if there was a strong feeling about it, Councillor, it would be a case of taking it up with the Minister. But probably in the circumstances of the moment about the application for heritage status, conservation is probably the right department.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder whether we could then give consideration to a C to highlight the costs that are going to be associated with applying for World Heritage status and the importance of partnership with the government in being able to fulfil those aspirations. You know, we remain silent on this at our peril. We're going to go into this LTP process and we're going to look at every single dollar line that we've got. And I understand that this is going to be to bring our manga up to the standard that would be required for World Heritage status. It is going to be very costly, and we need to use every opportunity we can to highlight to central government the perhaps failure to actually understand at the time of establishment what long deferred maintenance and so forth existed, and why we need to work with them more closely on the funding of achieving the wider aspirations.
I think an amendment of that nature is probably outside the scope of this paper, but I'll ask Phil Wilson to comment on that.
My advice, Your Worship, would be not to conflate too much here. I think we make a discrete decision about the appointment, which has been run through the government's traps. Their recommendation is the one before you at the moment. I think a separate piece of dialogue, a separate piece of advocacy to ministers around funding for the World Heritage is entirely in order, but we can pursue that in conjunction with the Maunga Authority itself. because there's the iwi interest to take into account here also.
I think that's probably the right advice in the circumstances.
Well, thank you for that. But my point, I hope that I've made quite clear, is that I am hopeful that a senior person representing the Crown will be put at this. This is not a position that we want to see somebody just being sent along for the ride. We want to see this being taken seriously by the government and a senior representative made available because of the importance of this going forward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Casey. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to speak, but I was just going to, well, I am now, obviously. I wasn't going to agree with C because they are two separate issues, and I know as the current Deputy Chair of the Tupuna Maunga Authority, there have been discussions amongst the committee around the issues that Councillor Fletcher has raised. So speaking to the recommendation, Your Worship, I note in 9 that the Tupuna Taonga or Tāmaki Makaurau Trust have also supported the appointment, as in the ability for the Crown person to be there, and also fully support the proposed 3-year term and the ability for another 3. And that basically, as pointed out in 8, ensures consistency of the Crown representation engagement. So, Your Worship, speaking to the recommendation, fully endorse it. And I know that iwi plus Tupuna Maunga Authority Committee also endorse the recommendations. So, and ngā mihi ki a koe e matua in regards to the report. Kia ora nā.
Thank you, Alf. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. To the contrary, no. And carried. And thank you very much, Dominic, for your participation here. We move to item 13 on the agenda, contributions policy and variation to that. And if I could ask, please, Andrew Duncan to come to the table and Matthew Walker. Oh, so Sean, sorry, I thought this was Andrew's paper. I'll formally move the motion. Have I got a seconder for that? Deputy Mayor Cashmore and Matthew or Sean, who would like to lead off on that? Matthew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll just give a little bit of background. Sean Thompson has been part of the team with Auckland Transport and ourselves negotiating the agreement with the developer, and I'll just make a couple of comments and then ask Sean just to round out the picture for you so you get a sense of the agreement in place with Drury South Limited. Look, this is a fairly administrative item. Effectively, what you would be approving is an amendment to our development contribution policy that lets us charge a different price in Drury South, reflecting the works that we're now getting ready to undertake to unlock housing in the SHA in Drury South. I do want to just give a little bit of background, touch on the mechanics, and then pass on to Sean. So a couple of points around the background. In a budgetary sense, we had actually provided for around 65 million in the 15-25 LTP. So there's no surprises here around the intention that we would make some commitments for infrastructure provision in the area. So in a budget sense, this is all fairly straightforward. The other important piece of context that I'm sure you'll probably remember, our HIF bid to central government that you authorised in March, I think, had a bigger area in the south which enveloped the Drury South area, and the spend in an infrastructure sense there is about 390 million, focused on enabling around just shy of 18,000 houses in the south. So a significant move in terms of greenfield development in the south, and this is a piece of that jigsaw. Now, this is where we kind of just get into the practical realities of where we are today and how we move forward. You'll all be aware, post the announcement from Minister of Finance, Prime Minister, 2 or 3 weekends ago in terms of the refashioning of Crown Fibre, giving it a bigger infrastructure mandate. So we sit here today with quite a valid expectation that indeed Crown Infrastructure Partnerships will start to pick up the work of, rounding up interested parties in the south in terms, in alignment with our HIF bid and becoming effectively the financier and arranger to keep this program moving. So I'm saying all of this so you get the context of today's decision. This is all just about being able to keep the ball rolling. In fact, it is about hitting earthworks season this summer, I believe, or spring. And so we've been able to, through that initial budget provision that we made in the current LTP, identify the capital source and what we've also put in place via the appropriate means. So we've held consultation with the single affected party, which is Drury South Limited, around an arrangement which would see that cost fully recovered through development contribution charges. So if you did look through one or two of the attachments, you'll see a pretty healthy increase in the development contribution charge that would apply in this area. It goes up by about $25,000 per house. They would be paying $41,000 per lot, and we've worked that through with them, and they accept that, understand that, and they're comfortable moving forward. So look, if I could just ask Sean perhaps to just make a couple of comments, perhaps Sean, just things around the precinct generally, so people get a sense of the wider initiative that Drury South Limited have. And also, I think there's an important clause that we've negotiated in the agreement which kind of honours the intent of keeping the ball rolling.
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, just within the Drury South precinct, in particular the SHA area, it's made up of roughly 45 hectares and is currently zoned residential precinct, terraced housing, apartment building zone, mixed housing urban zone and mixed housing suburban zone, with the balance of the precinct being light industrial commercial. So that's the current overall zoning for the Drury South precinct. In relation to the development agreement, the purpose of the development agreement, as Matthew's pointed on, is enables the developer to start earthworks to construct the bulk earthworks to construct the spine road in October. What the spine road does, the first section of the spine road, enables the SHA area to be opened up and further developed over the over a period of time. Yep.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Can I just start off the questions? The first question is, by making this change to the contributions policy, we effectively bring this development forward potentially by, 6 or 7 months? Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I would just say a full season, really.
A whole year.
Yeah,
12 months.
Yeah.
12 months. That's good. That's a good reason for doing it. The second thing is, you said that normally the development contribution would be about 25,000, was it, or 20,000 per house, and this policy will increase the development contribution to 45,000. Did I get those figures right? First of all?
Not quite right on the numbers. So the charge would be about 41,000 per lot in the area, and that's about a 25,000 per lot increase in the prior charge. You'll often hear us talk about averages at just over the 20,000 mark. Those are averages, so we differentially price stormwater and the various services according to cost in different areas.
And the reason, I mean, that's a doubling of the development contribution per lot. The reason for that, is that towards the financing of the SPV, or is it for other reasons?
So we've talked about this a lot, and the first thing is it's just simply the reality of the costs. So we've talked about the next greenfield areas in the south, in the north, in the northwest. You are going to see exactly this kind of pattern, whereby the overall DC charge moves reasonably significantly, but as we progress and develop a model with Crown Infrastructure Partners, there will also be a discussion around diluting or adding to that mix targeted rates and other tools. But there's nothing, it simply reflects the as-identified cost of providing infrastructure in those areas, both in the sense of here you've got an example of, a specific $18 million road. It's stage one of the spine road works. But you will have those developers, as does everyone else, still contributing to the likes of the CRL and major regional infrastructure that's catering for growth as well.
Okay, just so I know I've got that right. So this is more a reflection of the costs of the development of the infrastructure than anything to do with the financing of the SPV?
yes, although the two become, there's a marriage there. Yep.
Yep, I think. Right, any other questions? Councillor Casey and then Councillor Cashmore.
I'm looking at Schedule 4, Summary of Capital Expenditure of Growth and Community Infrastructure. Can you just tell me what we mean by, and I understand about community centres, halls, playgrounds and public toilets, but the phrase also used to fund projects subject to transition rules, Clause 8, Schedule 1AA. What is that?
Wow, yeah. I will do my best. That won't be that good, and I probably should have had one of Andrew's team members, Bobby Parkinson, here, who is right on this stuff. But I do recall Bobby stepping you and others through this. I think what that's referring to is at the time that the government changed the rules to make it harder for certain types of community infrastructure to be in the development contribution net. It did, however, let us transition some projects which were already on the books through the process. So I think that's all that's referring to, Councillor.
Okay, do we know how much of that fund is in the transition section and how much is in the new and expanded?
No, but I would be happy to have Bobby come back to you offline on that.
It would be good if... No, that's fine.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cashmore.
Yes, thanks. Matthew, as far as we understand the residential side of this with the 15,000 houses as part of the whole scope of that massive build that's happening in the Drury area, what about the commercial land? There's a big commercial development there going to employ between 5,000 and 6,000 people over time. Is they going to be contributing as well in this sort of method for this SPV type program going forward?
So, yeah, so that's absolutely the intention. I think when we talked a little bit last week, I think it was, about Crown Fibre Holdings, which is rebranding itself as Crown Infrastructure Partnerships. In fact, I'm quite keen to bring one of their executive along when we have a workshop around this sort of issue in early September. But the absolute intention is that wider south development, including commercial and all of the employment opportunities that come with the commercial development, will be a part of the program that they pick up the financing responsibility for, and that would include the wider Drury precinct.
So this, with your indulgence, Mr Mayor, is just bringing the process forward for this season?
Yeah, it's been an interesting process. Things with government take a while. We gave them the opportunity to move real quick. Feels like we're moving quick-ish, but not as quick as real quick. But if we didn't do this arrangement, quick would have become slow. So we're just putting a little piece in there, making a contribution in that sense. We take a degree of risk with the development contribution financing arrangement, but we're up for that. We'd indicated that. And it just enables Crown Infrastructure a few more months to refine their model, make the connections, and come in and hopefully do the bigger transaction.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Any wider comments on it? I think most of us will see this as positive, bringing forward by 12 months the start of construction of 700 houses. That's we need those houses, and we need them quicker, not slower. There's no comment. I'll put the resolution. It's on your screens in front of you. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. So, thank you very much, gentlemen, for that work. Item number 14, appointment to Living Cells Technology Limited, the Animal Ethics Committee. Warwick, can we have you back at the table?
I move, Mr Chairman.
I'll second.
Neil's been a good representative.
Been moved and seconded before I even got to it. That's
We've done this a few times before, Mr Chairman.
Yeah, I gather.
This one.
Moved Councillor Cooper, seconded Councillor Casey, I think. Probably doesn't require any questions, but are there any questions? Probably doesn't require any comment, but is there any comment? I'll therefore put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. Right, we're making good progress. Must be nearly lunchtime. Councillor Richard Hills, item number 15, your recent trip not to Taipei, but to Taipei, Taiwan.
Taipei. Was it spelt wrong?
It was originally, but I think it's been corrected. It's right on the screen.
Cool, so I just wanted to give you a quick update on the trip. Hang on, I need to turn this on. Never used it.
I swear that...
We get pictures.
Yes. So this was a Taiwan Future Leaders study camp. It was not funded by the ratepayer. The only cost to the ratepayer was the ratepayers union asking for it to be investigated, and I assume there was cost because they asked for it to be investigated, and it was $0.
Why are you the only non-statue in that picture?
Yes. There was a park full of statues of the Chiang Kai-shek, the founder of Taiwan, and then when the parliament changed, they took all the statues out of the schools and put them in one park. Cool. So basically, Taipei is quite a small area. The population is almost double ours, and it's very warm. The trip was fascinating to be with a whole lot of people from the Asia Pacific. There were attendees from all parts of politics, state governments, councils. It was really good to understand, what's been happening in their cities. So that was handy. Once again, so the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Taiwan paid for the trip, and I paid for my own accommodation. This is everyone on the trip, and that's in Liberty Square. And here is at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where I met Moira Turley, who's the Director of the New Zealand Commerce and Industry Office in Taipei. And we met separately with the government officials and the opposition and discussed a myriad of things, especially around climate change and energy. We visited all the religious and cultural temples. Every day was sort of seminars and conference, and then they took us to various parts around Taipei. So it was seminars on climate change, energy, regional policies, economic policies, and then we went to a tea factory and a knife factory. They actually made, there's a knife factory where they make knives out of the ammunition shells that were bombed on them, so they're recycling, which is good. The questions that we were often asked, it was around energy, so they are pretty jealous. Many of the officials are pretty jealous of how we are 80% renewable, when Taiwan is primarily coal and nuclear, but they're really wanting to move away from that and towards more renewable energy. Some of the issues they're having, though, because solar's the easiest way, is there's a lot of illegal building on top of all their buildings. So you'll have an apartment block, and then someone sort of squats and builds their own floor on top of that apartment block with sheds and iron and different things. So it's quite difficult to then get solar happening across. Their infrastructure is pretty amazing. There's a really good mix of historical stuff and the new mixed well together, and they're moving to more green buildings as well. I met with a councillor, a recently elected councillor, and she was really interested in what we're doing in public transport and cycling, and she sort of kept saying, don't get disheartened, we didn't have much 20 years ago, and now their facilities are amazing. She campaigned quite heavily on same-sex marriage, which is interesting as a councillor. I don't know how much that they'd be involved with that, but obviously had done some research on me, so she wanted to ask a lot of questions. So she gave me a rainbow hop card, which is a limited edition little hop card, which is quite nice. Their voter turnout of youth is pretty low, and so we discussed different ways on how we can improve that in our cities. But it's quite funny. They have 63, and you'll like this, Desley. They have 63 elected councillors, and they each have their own team of staff, so six staff each, and they can run their own campaigns and
don't get any ideas.
do a whole lot of stuff. But
a recommendation.
It was quite interesting to see that they were willing to do all these different campaigns, and also because there's 63 of them, they elect a chair for like a Speaker of the House almost, and they have to fight for positions, so they have props. She has a big nuclear warhead she holds up, and there was a whole lot of other random things, so to get a say, it's quite different to the orderly process we have here. Orderly. Most of the time. So they were quite, interested in our anti-nuclear stance, and they were amazed that we could get that through. On social housing, the sort of in the issues I was talking about last week, they said if you have public land, use it now, because they are at crisis point. They have a lot of homeless people and people that can't afford housing, and there is no land. There's not a postage stamp of public land that can be used easily for housing. So they were sort of saying use this as an opportunity now to plan ahead for that. Here's the U-bike system, which I thought was really, really interesting. These stations were everywhere, and they're really, really easy to use. They're about the last mile, first mile sort of thing at all the transport hubs around everywhere. They basically the trial failed, so they did a trial 7 years ago. So if you think of 7 years ago, that was only when we started the Super City, so it's not actually that long ago. They had 500 bikes. It failed. Basically, there wasn't enough people using it. But their advice to me or to us was increase the coverage. So the trial failed because there was limited coverage. There was only 11 sites. It was hard to register. It was too expensive, and there was too small. So then they ramped it up they went from 11 stations to 300 stations. They went from 500 bikes to 10,700 bikes. They went from 5,000 trips a month on these bikes to 50,000 trips a day. And that's only in 7 years. But that has completely changed the nature of the inner city. They don't barely have any on-street car parking at all now, and it's actually reduced the amount of space taken up from bike parking as well, because people just jump off the train and use these bikes as opposed to bringing their own into the city. And there's lots of scooters, I must say, but largely they've completely lost the need for on-street parking because it's so easy to jump off transport and jump on one of these bikes. It's about 40 cents per half an hour, so really, really cheap. And because everyone knows within about 5 minutes walk or 5 minutes ride there's another station to drop it, it's very easy and you don't have to go, what am I going to do with my bike? They're everywhere. It's run by the Department of Transportation, but they use a lot of commercial enterprise to help fund it. So they have a space on the back of the tyre which they use for advertising. Some of the stations have lots of advertising on them, and other companies are keen to advertise their things and get involved. I bumped into the mayor doing a big presentation on bikes, and he had a whole lot of people with bikes standing out in the street, and it was just hundreds of people cheering over bikes, so it was pretty interesting. It's obviously reduced emissions, and there's other things. Oh, and 95% now customer satisfaction, and they only have about a 1% theft rate because it's GPS. So, yeah, I guess our thing is when we do this, which inevitably we will, we have to make sure that it's sort of go big or go home, because if we make it too small, it's not gonna fly. That's just some other thing. Oh, the other thing is to build cycleways. So 4 years ago they had just under 50 kilometres of cycleways. So that's mostly separated cycleways. Now they've got 190 kilometres at the same time. So if you want to do a good bike share scheme, you've got to make it safe and easy for all ages, and then people will come. I went to the metro as well. It started, so they kicked it off 20 years ago. 1999, they had 35,000 passengers a day. Now they have 2 million passengers a day. So if you think of that they have 2.7 million population, and you could say most people are taking 2 trips a day, it's sort of almost half the population are using public transport on the metro every day. And they're aiming for 60% of all trips in the metropolitan area to be on public transport. The stations shut down, I think it's between 1 and 4, and everything is clean. So the tracks are clean, the stations are cleaned, the trains are clean inside and out. You're not allowed to take food or drink or gum. They're very strict to the security around that, but it is so clean and so well used, and that also increases people wanting to use it because it feels safe and it feels like a good place to be on. Some of their busiest platforms have one train every 80 seconds, and every train opens the doors and shuts them within 40 seconds, so you're either on or you're not, but it's okay because there's another one in about 1 or 2 minutes time. So it's pretty phenomenal stuff. There's the usage over the last 20 years. It's a phenomenal change if you invest. and I got to visit the mainframe or whatever. It looked like a NASA kind of headquarters. It was pretty amazing. They had everything going on, you know, watching for earthquake storms. They could tell if there was a fault, and they would send people, an army of people, to the fault straight away, which was really good. They've used lots of public artwork and made all the places, the stations, which I think we need to do with the City Rail Link and light rail stations and other things. We need to make them usable and exciting places to be. And much of it was funded through value uplift, much like we're trying to do with the City Rail Link. This is because, once again, their issue was they didn't have any land. So they would work with businesses, hotels, apartments to get all the stations underneath those buildings, and often funded commercially because people wanted people pouring into their businesses from underneath. They kept telling us it's never too late. You know, this did take them 20 years, but, you know, we're starting now effectively in the last couple of years to really ramp up public transport. So, you know, I think things can obviously change pretty fast. That is all. And if any questions?
Yep.
Right. Question. Well, first of all, I think Councillor Collins, you want to move that we receive the presentation. Councillor Filipaina, you want to second that?
Aye.
And we have a question from
How
Councillor
many of
Casey.
the 63 councillors were women?
Oh, I actually can't remember, but it was a good number, and the Parliament too. I can't remember, but I will get you those figures. They did. I've got the booklet, which has all that in there, but it's definitely an aim. They also have Indigenous seats as well, so that was quite interesting. Yeah.
Councillor Clode. Got a question? No? Councillor Cashmore.
Me. So good report, Richard. What is the topography of Taipei like? I've never been there. And what is the density of the population living?
Yeah, so it's pretty dense. I don't have the exact figures, I don't think, but I can get you those. But basically, you know, the area of the city is, if you think of Auckland, the urban area of Auckland's 1,000 kilometres squared, where Taipei's 271, and they have 2.7 million sitting there. So obviously more people means more investment is easier to happen. But it is mostly tall buildings, but they have a lot of parkland. It's really green, there's lots of trees, and they've left, similar to the heritage areas over time here, they've left a lot of spaces that are the old streets and everything as they are. But you don't feel overcrowded at all because people, I guess there's not many cars. So you kind of more people-friendly spaces. You don't feel like it's overcrowded or anything like that. But,
hilly or flat?
In the central city, it's pretty flat, but then there's, it gets hillier as you further you go out.
It's obviously changed a lot. When I first went there, you'd cross a road and there'd be 1,000 belching motorbikes bearing down on you, making a hell of a racket. So they've moved a long way in the last 20 years. Councillor Simpson, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Worship. Richard, if you had to say the top two things that potentially Auckland could benefit from if it adopted as a result of your visit, what would they be? What are the two main things you think that maybe Auckland should take up as a result of visiting Taipei?
Definitely the U-bike scheme. Potentially because of our topography, we may need to invest more in the electric bikes, but it was phenomenally easy, and it was just something that everyone was using, and you really noticed there was just no cars in the central city, and you've got tens of thousands of people everywhere. But because they've made the places you can cycle safe and easy to pick up, it's just simple, and it didn't use that much. The stations didn't use that much land, so that's one. And probably just making the public transport pleasant spaces and safe places to be. So there was always security, it was always really clean, like meticulously clean, and there was exciting stuff happening on. So I think if we turn everything we're doing from not just a infrastructure and moving people perspective, but about how we use every piece of land where people are as exciting places to be, I think people then want to look after it and use it a lot more. So yeah, definitely those two kind
Did the cyclists wear helmets?
No, that's the other issue that I think I might have mentioned it in here. Yeah. That is an issue for us. Over there, there's no laws for helmets. So I guess for me, I don't know if the government would ever change the law to stop helmets, but if there's a way, if we get some good separated cycle routes, is it a time where we say maybe on the separations or within the central city that maybe helmets aren't allowed? I think it's only us in Australia who force the helmet law. So that was something that was just so simple. It was you get off the train and you're literally riding maybe 500 metres or so to work, and the helmets are an issue. Whether people are comfortable reusing someone else's helmet or carry their own helmet with them, I don't know. That would be a challenge. So.
Okay, Councillor Filipaini, you've got a question?
It's not a question. I just want to acknowledge Ned from the Taiwan Economic and Cultural Office, who's here representing the Director General. So I just want to acknowledge him.
Sorry, I didn't see Leo there, and I must say that the information and being picked up at the airport and being taken. So I was prepared to taxi around on the day when I was visiting all the different transport hubs, and they took me around in a car and had translators for me, and had, Leo was checking in all the time if the trip was going all right and I was safe and happy, and it was the people and the hospitality was seriously amazing. It was nothing I'd experienced before, so it was pretty cool. And I was over there on my birthday, and the council sung me happy birthday and brought me a cake, and so it was quite cool.
Just don't expect that sort of treatment back here,
Yeah,
Councillor.
no.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Thank you. It's a very, very good report, and it's of value to us, and it was when Deputy Mayor Cashmore came back with his report. Those trips can be really valuable in getting insights and parallels on issues that are important to us. So moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. Item number 17 is 16. I've jumped one. Upper Mangatangi, Mangatawhiri catchments, co-governance arrangements. If I can get John Hutton and Kim Bellingham to come forward. This is a process paper, and we will be examining the issue in more detail on the confidential agenda. But John, would you like to lead off?
Kia ora, thank you. The process paper brings to the attention that the Crown is intending to provide a co-governance regime over the upper Mangatangi Mangatawhiri area. I'd prefer to have any more detailed discussion of this in the confidential area of the proceedings. It does make a lot more sense if you look at a map. So if you go to the substantive report, and attachment A has a map that indicates where the area is. It's the area surrounded by the black line in the north of the space. The substantive paper looks at a relatively straightforward issue, which is whether or not Auckland Council wishes to pick up the opportunity of participation on the proposed body in a non-voting capacity.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll probably leave most of our questions, I think, to the confidential agenda, but I'll move that the report be. Well, we'll note that there is a confidential report on this. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Watson. Are there any questions? Are there any comments? If not, I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Item number 17, summary of governing body information memos. It's been moved by Councillor Filipaina, seconded by Councillor Casey.
Aye.
Any questions? No. Just.
Oh, sorry.
Very, very, very quick. So I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Now, Alf.
Yep.
And to the contrary, no. Carried. I'll move that we now go on to the confidential agenda, and for the